the last couple of weeks. There was a real possibility that Iran and Israel could have had a very large, extended conflict that would have changed the geopolitical dynamic of what's going on in the Middle East dramatically. We wouldn't be talking about Palestine anymore. We'd be talking about something much different, like global economic catastrophe based upon, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, simultaneous with the closure of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, energy supplies collapsing, potential permanent damage to energy producing infrastructure in the region. But we're not talking about that because we dodged a bullet. Iran issued a counterattack to the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate on April 1st. On April 14th, Iran counterattacked, and Israel responded with, a very face-saving superficiality, and then both sides said, that's enough. But it's not just that their, deterrence factor had been, redefined. So now Iran had sort of deterrent supremacy over Israel, saying that you can no longer get away with the attacks that you've done in the past. What it did is it set in stone the limits of this conflict. Because now, in the past, prior to that, everybody was worried about, well, what if this happened, then it could spin out of control and have this broader conflict. Well, what happened here is that we solved this equation by saying there will not be a broader conflict. Nobody will tolerate a broader conflict. The United States made it clear to Israel that we will not stand with you if you attack Iran, and Israel knows that they can't attack Iran unless the United States stands with them. And so we've taken that out, and Iran has said, we are solely focused on getting ready for BRICS and the new economic reality that we want. We don't want a broader war that destroys the economy. So all the major parties have said, we're not doing that. And so what they've done is they went ahead and they capped the upper limit of this conflict, which is bad for Benjamin Netanyahu because he was always able to operate under, I'm a wartime leader. And if I can't finish Gaza, then I'll go into Lebanon. If it's Lebanon, then I'll go into Iran. But either way, I'm going to come out as the wartime guy, maintain my credibility, maintain my viability, and stay in power. Now you've capped it, which means, frankly speaking, that there isn't going to be a big war with Hezbollah because that's always been linked to the other big war. So now Hezbollah is just going to be a giant, escalation management scenario where both sides bomb each other more, but it's never going to be allowed to erupt into the big conflict, which means we're back to Gaza. It's all about Gaza. And that forces Netanyahu to look at Gaza. What is he going to do? How does he use Gaza as a mechanism to remain relevant? Because Gaza is, sort of the dual epitomes of his defeat. Gaza emerged out of the October 7th failure, and Gaza is in itself a failure of the Israelis because they said they wanted to militarily destroy Hamas, politically destroy Hamas, and they haven't achieved either of those objectives. So the Israelis now are going to start getting into politically creative ways of talking about a forever conflict here, but they have to do it in a way that creates pressure relief valves for the corner they've boxed themselves into. One of the great Hamas victories isn't what's happened on the battlefield, it's what's happened around the world. It's what's happening in Columbia University right now, University of Texas, etc. That Israel has lost global public support. Global public sentiment has been turned decisively against Israel. And this is a very bad thing for Israel. As we speak, the International Criminal Court is on the cusp of issuing arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Gantz and Gallant, the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff. Unprecedented. The International Court of Justice has been condemning Israel for genocidal policies. And the combination of these two means that Israel's lost all credibility in the eyes of the international community. And this is a bad thing. When you have Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, a Democrat who is very close to Israel and AIPAC, saying that Benjamin Netanyahu needs to resign, when you have former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, again, very strong supporter of Israel, saying the same thing, this is bad for Benjamin Netanyahu. He was just threatened by the Minister of National Security, this right-wing guy whose name I can't remember right now, But he lectured Netanyahu, reminding him that he has to go into Rafah or else he's going to lose his coalition. So Netanyahu is in a very, very difficult situation right now. And how is he going to navigate out of this? This is the big question. The United States has put him on notice that should he go into Rafah in a big way, that we will start cutting military aid. And that is the death knell of any prime minister of Israel. If you've screwed up so badly that the United States is cutting military aid, which no American president's been willing to do for a long, long time, then you probably don't deserve to be prime minister anymore. And that's what he's worried about. So the Israelis are going to start coming up with innovative ways to describe the future of the conflict in Gaza. Their end goal is to keep Hamas from resuming its role as political head. They're hoping that they can basically wear the world down and get the world willing to accept a negotiated solution that neuters Hamas as a political entity and then demilitarizes Hamas. Right now, Hamas doesn't seem to be in a position where they're willing to accept either one of those outcomes. And that creates political problems for Netanyahu. Hamas is holding on to more than 130, I guess, hostages, prisoners. And, every day this creates more and more political nightmare for Netanyahu. So it's the Houthi, the Ansarallah movement continues to fire, weapons at shipping, shutting down the port of Elayat. That's costing Israel billions of dollars. Their economy is collapsing. They're politically isolated, et cetera. So what's happening right now is you're seeing Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, a very desperate man right now, trying to, he's got, every day it seems like people are throwing more. He's trying to juggle all these apples and people just keep throwing apples at him, and he's got to keep them all in the air. And eventually it's all going to come down, and that'll be the end of Benjamin Netanyahu as the prime minister of Israel.
Yeah. And what's interesting about this moment too is how it has opened up just many avenues for, as you said, a return to focusing on Gaza. You mentioned Iran, which I thought was a very successful retaliation and response to Israel's war crime on its embassy in Syria. Now, last month, and we've spoken about this in the past, Russia met with the Palestinian forces, the various resistance groups that could potentially form some kind of Palestinian national government. And now China, actually, I believe, just over the past day or so, has also been meeting with Hamas, and I believe it was Fatah, holding reconciliation talks. Could you talk about this dynamic here, especially around diplomacy when it comes to Russia's entrance into and China's entrance into this conflict? Because it feels like on this end too, there is interesting developments that speak to Israel's declining status and position in the world vis-a-vis also the United States' declining position and status in the world.
Well, I mean, Israel used to be able to call the shots. Israel, before the Iranians retaliated, had what was known as deterrent supremacy, meaning that they could pretty much do anything they wanted in the region, and nobody had the courage to strike them back directly. That's where Hamas and other terrorist organizations made their money, because people could provide support to them, and then they would, carry out various terrorist acts. And this was sort of an indirect way of getting revenge for what Israel was doing abroad. But as a state, Israel never suffered an existential threat because everybody was afraid of striking Israel. Saddam Hussein fired 49 missiles against Israel in January and February of 1991 during Operation Desert Storm. A lot of people don't know this, but when the war ended, the Israelis made their top priority the killing of Saddam Hussein. And they actually created plans to accomplish that. And they were prepared to execute those plans in the fall of 1993, when they held a major exercise, a rehearsal for this. I guess Saddam's uncle, Karilla, had died and was going to be buried. And Saddam was going to go up to Tikrit for the funeral outside of the village of Auja. And there was a funeral procession that the Israelis knew about. And so they had already sent in their Sayat Matkal guys. They had reconnoitered the area. They had their ambush site picked. And so they were doing one last rehearsal of the convoy, of the firing sequence, who was going to take out the lead trucks, who was going to kill Saddam, how they were going to disengage and everything. It was supposed to be a rehearsal without live ammunition, but even the best commandos in the world make mistakes, and Sayat Matkal, instead of having a dummy launcher, had the real launcher, and they fired the missile, and the missile went in and they hit the car carrying the soldier playing Saddam, killed him, killed a bunch of other Matkal guys, and the extra guys got shut down. And then generals who were in disagreement with this plan leaked it to the press, and that was the end of that. But Israel never forgave Iraq for this. It's one of the reasons why the Israelis changed their assessment in 1999, 2000, about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. I worked with the Israelis for 4 years and got them to admit that Saddam was a rational actor and that Iraq had been fundamentally disarmed. And Iraq fell from the #1 threat to about the #6 or #8 threat. But Israel couldn't forgive Saddam Hussein for the sin of attacking it. So it reversed it, got the United States to go in, bring Saddam down, and get Saddam executed. And the Israelis were very much a part of that execution decision. Why do I mention this? Because if you attack Israel, Israel's policy is you're going to pay an overwhelming price. And everybody knew that Israel was behind this, that this was part of the Israeli policy. And so, if you're Bashar al-Assad and you have missiles and Israel's bombing you, do you send your missiles up against Israel knowing that Israel now will not rest until you're dead, until your family's dead? No, that's deterrence value. The same thing with the Iranians. Israel assassinates Iranian scientists in Tehran. Israel puts viruses in centrifuges. Israel blows up centrifuge production. Israel attacks Iranian personnel and facilities in Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Yemen. But Iran does nothing because Iran is operating under the assumption that if we attack Israel, Israel will come in 10 times as hard. But the Iranians built up a capability and they changed that deterrence analysis. And so, today, Israel is a nation that no longer has that deterrence supremacy. So now how do they operate? Where do they go from here? And the answer is that they're going to be looking for a compromise solution in Gaza. What do you need to have a compromise solution? You need to resolve the quandary Israel has created for itself about Hamas is a military organization, Hamas is a political entity. Hamas is winning right now. That's the thing. And if you're winning, you don't give up your strong hands. Hamas isn't going to voluntarily demilitarize. Hamas isn't going to give up politically. And so now if, let's say you're Russia and China, and you just invited Iran and Saudi Arabia to come play ball with you at BRICS. Iran's a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You have grand plans of regional, economic unions, et cetera, that need, viable economies and things moving in. The last thing you need is this war dragging on forever that has the potential of disrupting everything that you're working to do. So you have to come up with a diplomatic solution. And it appears that Russia, based upon their earlier conversations, and China, based upon what's happening now, are trying to bring Hamas and Fatah together. And anybody who knows the history of the Palestinians know that Hamas and Fatah are like oil and water, baby. They just don't mix. They don't like each other. It's not going to happen. But the Israelis have a history of working with Fatah, of working with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the Palestinian Authority. Now, they've corrupted it thoroughly. One of the benefits of Hamas winning the way they have is that Hamas has a lot of political cards to play. If there was an election today, Hamas would beat Fatah. They would beat Mahmoud Abbas, the president. This is a reality. So Hamas has these cards. Fatah can't ignore them. In fact, if Fatah ignores them, if there's an election, Fatah's out. So the compromise is, how do you get Hamas and Fatah to come together so that Hamas has a meaningful role inside Fatah, but they're not called Hamas anymore? So that when you turn to the Israelis, and they say, we demanded that Hamas be eliminated as a political organization. You say, Hamas has dissolved. And the Israelis go, really? Yep, Hamas has dissolved. Well, who's running the show now? We got a new thing called Hamas, or whatever they want to call it, Fatah, Hamas put together. But there's going to be something new, and the United States, Russia, and China are going to go, that's what you demanded, Israel. You asked for it. You got it. You shut up. We're done with this. And then they're going to say demilitarization. Well, Hamas has won a great military victory. How do you demilitarize? The Qassam brigades disband. And then reform is Fatah. And Fatah 2, Fatah 2.0, whatever, you rebrand them. And so, but the guys who fought, the guys who are the heroes, the guys who are still there, they're in there, they're operating, but they're now part of an umbrella that will become politically acceptable to the Israelis. And so that's what the United States is pressuring Israel to accept, and Russia and China are working to create the compromise, because the United States doesn't have the credibility anymore to sit down with Hamas and Fatah and bring them together. We can't do that. Russia and China can. China, it's interesting. For years, China says they wanted to take a leading role in this. And I remember I started writing papers about this for another entity that I write for. And I remember the pushback from the editorial people that China's all talk, no action. China wants to do this, but what credibility does China have? And I'm saying, well, it's China. They're pretty credible. No, but what track record do they have? And then overnight, China negotiates rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And I'm like, well, there you go. China did something that nobody else was able to do. And then, in order to square, because again, these are Western analysts that just can't get it through their head that China is capable of greatness. They're like, yeah, but that really wasn't anything, was it? It was just a flash in the pan. It's not really going to change things, etc. And China still doesn't have the credibility. And now China is probably going to be successful in negotiating, because what China can bring to the table that nobody else can is economic assistance. And when you're looking at Gaza right now, when you're looking at the need to rebuild Gaza, China's the only one that can meaningfully make that happen. And that's a big deal for the Palestinians when talking about the future. And so China is a big player here. And I think China is going to, together with Russia, because Russia has credibility. Russia has been an honest broker all along. So the combination of Russian and Chinese diplomacy, I think, is going to create a compromise solution about the future of Hamas that will assuage Israel politically and begin creating the process for a political reconciliation, a drawdown on this. Now, how you get from there to a Palestinian state, you can't do that with Benjamin Netanyahu and government. So no matter what, Netanyahu's got to go. And I think he's going to go by taking a hardline position on whatever Chinese solution there is, and America's finally going to say, we're done with this, and walk away from Netanyahu. And at that point in time, his coalition will collapse, and then there will have to be another governing coalition that understands in order to survive, you have to have America on your side. And they will agree to accept the Russian and Chinese compromise.